So, welcome to the Solar Astrology Podcast. We are filming this on July 17th on Monday at 10:25 Central European Time.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hambra. Today, we are going to talk about this zodiac sign of Cancer in honor of this Cancer new moon. We are recording this during the Cancer new moon, so we are very excited.
Yes, and it's also during Monday, which is the moon day. It's ruled by the moon, so it's even more fitting.
Yes, it's ruled by the moon, like the zodiac sign of Cancer, for those who don't know it. And Cancer is also the exaltation of Jupiter. Cancer is also a yin, so a feminine, cardinal water sign. And it's particularly exciting because it's the first zodiac sign of the element of water we meet, but for the first time we have a repetition of the modality because it's the second cardinal sign we meet after Aries, which are signs that tend to initiate things.
Yes, that is very interesting. And while I don't personally have any conclusion to this, but it's very interesting to observe how each season is missing out an element. So like in spring, we have, fire, earth, and air. And then, summer starts, with Cancer, right? So it's like water, air, and earth. So there's always like
water, fire, and earth.
Oh, sorry, water, fire, and earth. So there's always like one element that is missing in a season. And that's just very interesting. There's not actually it's just like a fact that it's out there. But I find that very fascinating. And summer starts with the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just go on holidays to the sea.
Yeah,
And
most people do.
Of course, the symbol of the zodiac sign of Cancer is the crab, which is very pretty, and I think it's maybe one of the most descriptive symbol for the zodiac sign, because the crab is like hard on the outside and it's shell, but on the inside it's very soft and fragile, which, as you will hear, are qualities of the Cancerian people.
Yeah, like this words like hard shell, soft heart is usually something that you can very easily associate with people with many Cancer placements.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a very protective quality, but like at the core, it's a very like soft quality, a very caring, nurturing one.
Yeah, and I would love to make an emphasis on the protective qualities and the association with Cancer with maternity, fertility, growth, and abundance. All of those factors are indeed needed for pregnancy. And when you're a mother, you like the archetype of the mother, there is not right or wrong way to be a mother, but the archetype of a mother is usually one of the caring woman, nurturing woman, with fertile. But she also has to be protective. I mean, look at nature. When animals give birth, the mother are actually one of the most dangerous animal you can meet.
Yes,
For example,
totally.
with the wild boar, you don't want to meet her with children. You really don't want to.
Yeah, that's why exactly there's like a very protective quality. And that's why, I mean, we'll talk about this later on, but essentially this is also the reason why it's so important, I think, for all the water signs. But it's very important to have good and strong boundaries and be very adamant about, what you let into the circle, your circle. And then also since it's a Jupiter moon combo, essentially, this is also a big reason why Cancerians are known for having very big feelings and a lot of moods, because Jupiter is a planet that amplifies, and the moon itself, I mean, we view it as a planet in astrology. It's like the most changeable planet. It is constantly doing things. It's changes the signs the fastest. Like every 2.5 days, it goes into a new zodiac sign, and then you can clearly visibly see the phases of the moon in the sky. There's a new moon and a full moon and all the other phases. So there's a lot going on, and it's actually also so interesting. I think one of the very first things I was doing in the beginning when I first got into astrology, it was really, the moon that I was observing, and then especially having some sort of diary or just being very observant how my mood fluctuates throughout the moon cycle, depending on which sign the moon is crossing over and what the moon is doing. So you're being ruled by the moon, like that just it is just so clear why feelings and emotions might be so fluctuating, and why it's so important for Cancer to have a good relationship towards this, big feelings that are coming and going, ebbing and flowing like the water.
Yes, indeed. Very beautifully phrased. I mean, moodiness. Moodiness is the word for Cancer, maybe. And it is also super interesting to notice that, Jupiter and the moon gives to Cancer those soft qualities. And of course, those are things that makes one feel a little bit vulnerable. So that's why they need a shell. It's also super interesting because Cancer is the detriment of Saturn and the fall of Mars. And the malefics are useful for many different tasks, among which offer some sort of protection. And, we see that Cancerian kind of lack of a hard protection. And when they try to protect themselves, they usually tend to be pretty introvert, reserved, and sometimes it's also one of the biggest stereotypes about Cancer out there is that they say that Cancerian are just passive aggressive, which is funny because it's the fall of Mars and you are being aggressive, but you're still being passive. So it's not a really strong form of aggression or defense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's Cancer fights in a different way. It protects in a different way. For sure, yeah. And also the fact that, Jupiter, which rules a lot of our like beliefs and the structures we have and the way we view the world and just the many things and like our religions and spiritualities and all these big things. There's often this feeling that that the feelings of Cancer can sometimes be pretty irrational. This is because of this reason, because sometimes the Cancer can really barricade itself in its shell and believe that the feelings are the reality, which is not always true. Emotions are not always reflective of the actual reality. And the moon is also very much linked to, memories and nostalgia. And sometimes things from the past can come up and we can view it as some sort of indicator of the present moment when really it's actually not. It's just the past, coming up. So this is also sometimes very much observable in Cancer, perhaps maybe a bit more of a difficult quality to face.
Sure.
with the Moon Jupiter combo, but it's definitely also something that comes up and that is just good to be aware of, that you can really, start to believe your emotional state as the reality of certain things when it's not, it's definitely just not the only reality that is out there.
Yes, and many people tend to forget that, but one good word to describe Jupiter is being dogmatic, which means if you have this belief, it's really hard to change. Or you take, actually, dogma is taking something that is not tested and say, like, accepted like a truth, like a universal truth. For example, it's like the dogma of the church. And that is why sometimes if considering person as a belief, which is based on their mood, feelings, emotion, and maybe it's also fruit of a deep introspection because there is really a lot of value into that. It can be hard for them to, confront themselves with other opinion, different opinion, because there is this dogmatic quality, which can be difficult to change. I mean, also the cardinal modality, it's definitely not a mutable sign. So they consider wants to go on their own direction in this sense.
Definitely. And, talking about like the feelings, and I think we can also go to the place of like emotional security, and because this is such a big theme for Cancer, and this is so much linked to feeling like the body is a home, but then also like all the surroundings. And I think this is, I mean, not just I think, this is also the reason why the Cancer archetype is linked to the home and the family and the homeland.
Yeah, sure.
Because this is where we essentially source a lot of our security from. It is a very important network that we have, starting from our bodies in the first place as like the first home, and then the rest in the outside world.
Yes, I like it very much. And I think that, well, I don't think that there are studies that, show that really the emotion we feel have a physiological impact on our whole balance and system. And I think that probably cancer is the perfect sign to be in touch with their emotion from a bodily level. And in psychological modern astrology, moon tends to be just emotions, but especially in traditional astrology, the moon was also considered as the body, so it's literally a bodily feeling. We could say also a visceral feeling, being connected with the emotion we feel in the body. For example, you feel in love, you feel the heartbeat, that is very Cancerian because it's feeling the responses that your body has as a response from external factor, falling in love or whatever, which is very beautiful, but it's not evident for anyone.
Yes, it's a very internal experience, truly.
Yeah.
And yes, you're so right. In Hellenistic astrology, actually, you can really also look to the moon if you want to see and determine the health of a person or the environment that they grew up in, because it can give you a lot of hints towards that. And I didn't know that before. And once I start to realize that, I feel like a lot of things made also so much more sense to me when I was looking at my moon placement, which in my case it's in Gemini, but it just gave me so much more introspection into how my bodily health functions and like my nervous system and everything. So really, the moon is so linked through the body, and actually there's like the beliefs of a lot of ancient astrologers were that when the soul came into the world, it would pass through the planets, and the moon would be the last planet it would pass.
Yeah,
And also,
according to the Chaldean order.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And then when one would die, the soul would leave the body, the moon would also be the first planet it would go through again. And hence, this is also why the moon was associated so much with our physical affairs and the health of our bodies.
Yeah. It was considered as the most mundane body in astrology, and also so beautiful. She is a reflective light because, of course, her phases are nothing less than the light of the sun being reflected in different position angulations. But in astrology also, the moon is considered as a reflective light of the planets in that moment, especially also being the last planet or luminary of the Chaldean order. She was condensating all of the planetary energies. And that is also why when you are listening, for example, for horoscopes or forecast for new moons or full moons, people tend to look the overall chart as well, because the moon, it can be the body, but it can also be the environment we grew up in. And this is a good analogy because when you look at the lunation, you also look at the other planet, because the moon is really receptive to the environment. And environment is a moon word. Also, I don't know if you want to add something to it, because I have another interesting point, but it's not really connected.
No, I think you can say your point.
Yeah, my point. It's also connected to the weather, because Cancer season, we didn't mention that Cancer season begins with the summer solstice. And this was
true.
Yeah, and this was when the floating of the Nile happened in ancient Egypt, and they were using the heliacal rising of Sirius. And when the Nile floated, it was sign of fertility. So that is just super interesting. But what happens at the summer solstice? Actually, it happens that we are still in summer. Okay, till Virgo, we are still in summer, but the light slowly start to decrease. So Cancer really represent the descent of the soul from, in the Chaldean order, it's the descent of the soul into the body. Again, the body plays an important, essential role here. And that is also just an amazing analogy of why the moon and Cancer are related to motherhood, because motherhood, mothers give birth. So they literally welcome a new soul into a new body. And that is the analogy with the solar season that Cancer carries. And it's indeed very deep. I think probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite.
Yeah, I think that's why also perhaps, darker, deeper feelings are linked with Cancer, because it is a first, descent into darkness again after the light of the light half of the year. It's like the initiation into, okay, now the days are getting shorter again. And Cancer is very aware of the fact. And that's why it's like this retrieval and this introspection, like the first introspection that happens again. And in the next sign in Leo, it's again more stabilizing, and the sun is so prone, and that's why you don't see it so much in Leo actually. And then again in Virgo, and that's how we go on. But this is about Cancer.
This is about Cancer, yes, indeed. But definitely. And what I also like is, when I used to go to the kindergarten, and maybe some of our listeners are also parents, it is typical to see children that they don't want to separate from the mother because they have nostalgia, or and it's cancerian itself, because Cancer is the first, if following the analogy of the Chaldean order, is when the soul detaches itself from the metaphysical world. And I mean, it's not that it's detached, but it enters the physical world. So there is a sort of detachment in all of that. You deliver a baby, and the baby is separate from you, whereas the 9 months before, you were one thing for him, for him perspective, So that is also very interesting, and there can be a little bit of issues in detaching from the mother, and for Cancer to detach from certain feelings. They are very, very affectionate to memories, smells, feelings, places, lands. So that is very beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that is so much because, okay, well, the first point I actually wanted to make is that, the way, like the way the baby is born and the environment that it is in and the way it is being nourished impacts like the whole life of the child, essentially. I mean, even when the baby is still in the womb of the mother, it's already impactful in so many ways what is happening in the environment. So first of all, there is that, and this is also why the link to nourishment and like this security, this family security, is so important.
And what I also love is that Cancer is the rising sign of the Tima Mundi. The Tima Mundi was a scheme used into Hellenistic astrology to explain the scheme of essential dignity, and it's just so beautiful that, and Tima Mundi was like, it means the chart of the world. So it's very beautiful that Cancer is related to birth. So of course it has to be the rising sign of the Tima Mundi.
Yeah, like the birth of the universe, essentially.
Yeah, indeed, exactly.
That's so beautiful.
And it's super coherent with the principle of the soul entering the body.
Very much. Yeah, and also I remembered what I wanted to say.
Yay.
Well, just because again, the environment is so important for the child. And then again, as we already talked about, how, emotions impact a Cancerian person so much, and it's linked to nostalgia. Well, that is because, again, everything is linked back to the childhood and the growing up, and how it's influenced us our whole lives, and how the emotions, especially the one that not fully get felt, or are repressed for whatever reason, because sadly that's a reality for many people. Not all Cancerians have amazing families to grow up in. Like, not everyone learns to have a healthy way of dealing with emotions. So I always love to think about the book, or just the phrase of the book, "The body keeps the score," which is so much about the trauma that, and not just that, but just like everything that gets stored in our bodies that we do not release, and how that impacts our health and the way we view attachment or security, and all these things that we later grow up in, and all these patterns that accumulate, that later on, when people start to reflect more, you realize like, oh, I'm repeating an emotional pattern as I did with my father, or I'm doing the same thing my mother was doing, or things like that. And that is very, very, Cancerian, like seeing this, emotional patterns in like the whole family system, and how really it is in a way our job to heal that or transmute that. And we do that by establishing a new sense of security in our body and having a safe outlet to feel and express our emotions.
Yes, indeed. And I feel that this point also strengthens the connection with the signification of the moon, because, in modern astrology, it's more related to the emotions, whereas for the traditional side, it was also considered the environment. And as human beings, we develop emotional patterns or just psychological or behavioral patterns as adults based on the emotions we felt when we were growing up, which we just absorbed from our parents or the environment we grew up in. So I feel it's a little bit of a bridge, right? Because when you develop your own personality growing up, you just soak up things from your environment, and that's emotions.
Absolutely. And oh yeah, also we haven't talked so much about the joys of the planets, which essentially is assigning the planets to specific houses in the chart where they are doing really well. And the moon has its joy in the third house. And the third house has so much to do with our day-to-day routines and our close by environment and the rituals and things that we do
Brothers and sisters as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the things that we do to feel safe and nourished, like day-to-day stuff.
Yes.
And this is why the moon is doing really there, because it's also such a fluctuating house. It's like it's like this routine, that is always like the moon. It's always doing the full moon and the new moon.
Yeah. One of the most difficult house to grasp.
I think so. Yeah. It's again, the meaning, I think, in Hellenistic astrology is a bit different than the modern one, or especially the one that associates the third house with Gemini, because we separate the houses from the zodiac signs. There's so much to learn about the third house. It's a very, very fascinating house in and of itself. And I have it in Capricorn, and with so much Capricornian stuff that has been going on the past 2 years, I really rediscovered this house in so many new ways. It's like you can't just narrow it down to like neighborhood and siblings and like the stuff that is usually associated with the third house. Like, yes, it's so much also about the communication, but again, there's the daily rituals that you're doing, which was a new discovery for me and made so much sense.
But also, like, the third house and the moon are associated to communication, but in a different way. Just because the moon changes and moves so quickly, that is communication, because
absolutely,
yes, a fast connection. And you were talking about the fact that, yes, in modern astrology, it is really the focus on verbal communication, which also comes from Gemini, which is, associating zodiac sign with the houses, meaning it's not something that is done in the traditional approach. But, I've always thought, since we were talking about the Nile and Egypt, of the god Thoth, which was the god of the moon, but he was also the god of communication. And it's just so beautiful because it's the god of communication, but it's also the god of the moon. And I see really the archetype moon, Mercury being merged. And, even though they don't have a connection with the third, I mean, the moon has a connection with the third house, but Mercury doesn't. The joy of Mercury is in the first house, and which means that it's like a sextile with the moon. And I think that this quality is something that, Mercury and the moon have in common. They are both communication, but hey, the mercurial communication is much more verbal, chitty chatty, whereas the communication of the moon is much more, internal, like communicating with a person while you're trying to establish an emotional connection. You're communicating your feelings. It's much more bodily and, I would say, visceral, if we could say, communication, and both of them are a thing and they are different, which makes me also think about, you know, the zodiac wheel and the fact that Cancer is the zodiac sign after Gemini, because basically what changes is that, you know, emotions and emotional connection is added to the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer is like, okay, we have communication, we have mind and curiosity, we have intellect, but we also have an environment, we have emotional connection, we have family and support. We have to communicate with them to have this safety and stability, but, you know, emotions is what is mainly added. Not that Gemini are just emotionless robots. Of course not. And remember that everyone has a birth chart with planets in different signs. So
Yeah,
don't worry. But
exactly. We're talking about the archetype of the signs much more right now than
yeah,
the birth chart of a person, which is a lot more complex. And here you can definitely see that there is like, I feel like it's just also so much a need for meaning, and emotions give us meaning. They
yeah.
make things emotions are a very big factor in what we do or what we don't do, or what we decide
Mm-hmm.
or what we decide against for.
Yeah.
So, and also, you know, easily manipulatable.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to mention that what I find interesting, the moon is super interchangeable. Well, Mercury is also the planet after the moon that is like the most
Yeah.
interchangeable, you know, and doing things and constantly doing its retrogrades and moving faster than the sun. So there definitely is a big exchange, you know, between moon and Mercury in
Oh,
this
definitely.
combination.
Definitely. That is very beautiful. Also, I wanted to add that uh we we have the fertility, the water, the abundance in Cancer, and the exaltation of Jupiter, and you know, the moon that signifies the body. So sometimes, especially during Cancer transits, there can be a little bit of indulgence, maybe especially with food. Because food is what gives us nourishment. So that is just a random point, but it is a point.
Yeah, no, it is important to mention because it is the, you know, Jupiter moon combination, and there's also some side effects to that. I think one side effect also is what I've, you know, mentioned briefly before, like the, you know, emotional manipulation and how easy it is to um you know, with the Jupiterian side, which is so much about like our ideas and ideals, and how oftentimes it is being used to manipulate us in a certain way to get us to, you know, maybe buy something, like in marketing. And like you see it on television so many times. I don't even really watch so much television anymore, but you know, as a child, like it's the emotions that get manipulated into wanting to buy something. It is
Mm-hmm.
used in that way to sell an idea, you know, where you're like, oh, I really want that and I need this. And this can also lead to some sort of overindulgence, or just this feeling like, oh, having this external thing will bring some sort of um validation, or a false sense of
Mm-hmm.
safety.
Yeah.
And so often we even know, like we are aware that it's not going to do something, yet we still
By
buy it, you know.
yeah. Yeah, or just the you know, the commercials, you know, they just play on emotions. And also not just for selling purposes, but also in politics. I mean, the most basic propaganda is when, for example, politicians talk about the child well-being and sensitive topics for the population, which of course are important, but sometimes they're just used for propaganda and then actions are not, carried out. And yes, one of the most effective propaganda for the population is just, hit on the emotion, hit on the families. And
Definitely,
that
definitely.
will lift up a lot of things politically, not for
Yes.
wars or stuff. I mean, of course, it's not the solution is for everything, but it is definitely something that is done and was done, and I think will be done forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, it can also be used in a positive way, to
Hmm.
steer something up and to get people to do something, to get people to care. That's what has, also in a way led many revolutions to happen in the first place and
Yeah.
changes to be made, which is also why again we can see Cancer is a cardinal sign. It can start things. It's just again at the same time still the detriment of Saturn and the fall of Mars. It's a different type of revolution that begins. It's
Yeah.
much more on an emotional level than it is on like I want to like fight this and
Yeah.
which is much more like margin in a way.
Yeah. One example could be, just incentivize people to donate blood, for example, to incentivize people to do an act of not charity, or just, something that serves people in need, you know?
Mhm.
And it's very easy to use emotion. It's efficient, but it's actually why you do that,
Yes, yes.
You donate blood
Exactly.
to help people. You give money to charity because you want to help people. And if you would be a robot without emotions, you wouldn't do that unless you're just, want the maximum survival of the population or something. Sorry, now I'm just being a little bit of an idiot, but it is a thing.
For sure, yeah.
Also, something that we mentioned before was being passive aggressive. It is definitely, again, a Cancer feature. And what does it take for being passive aggressive? First of all, sometimes it's, an emotional reaction, feeling the need of being protected, but sometimes, like this reaction is just it just derives for the fact that someone hurt our feelings. So sometimes there is a lack of objectivity because we are so, like, the Cancer archetype is so in touch with their emotion that sometimes they forget about objectivity. And that is also why, it is this sign is the detriment of Saturn. And they sometimes consider, and it's more the negative sides we are listing, but there can be the tendency to responsibilize other people for how we feel. And it's, again, the detriment of Saturn. Saturn likes and naturally takes responsibilities for their own actions. But with Cancer, where Saturn is debilitated, sometimes there can be issues in, take our own responsibilities. And yes, again, that is due to the attachment toward the strong beliefs in our emotion and the validity of our emotions, which for sure are valid, but the lack of rationality is the lack of the Saturnian energy, we can say. And also, since Saturn represents the time, it is just so interesting that sometimes when we look introspectively, time flies. We get lost in our emotions sometimes. When we wonder and stimulate our imagination, sometimes it feels like time doesn't exist. Or it can happen when we are spending our time with a significant other. like you are feeling so well, you're so deep into the connection you are establishing with the other person that time just
Mhm.
moves so quick. It's like Saturn, right? You're forgetting about the time.
Yes, yes.
So beautiful.
Yeah,
And
also how Saturn is, the slowest moving of the inner planets, and the moon is like, so quick. And emotions are usually things that come and go very quickly, but it can feel like when we are going through something that it is going on for like an eternity. And this is also why Saturn is in detriment, because it's not an objective it's just a feeling. It's not really based on truth. It's just based on what it does in our body,
mhm.
and that oftentimes is the feeling that we get, right? When we're stuck in something, it's the feeling that we get, oh, this is going to last forever.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's just our perception of what that means. It's not actually based in like a more linear time view, which is more Saturnian, where it's much more visible, like a time frame and a cycle, and how long something will go or not go.
Yes, indeed. And also the fact we were talking about the fact that we sometimes we feel emotions in our body.
Mhm.
That is also one of the difference between Gemini and Cancer, that sometimes Gemini is like an ADHD body that is not really aware of environment and body and time. In Cancer, we are very well aware of the body. Uh, the consciousness really resides into the body. And also an interesting point is that when we feel emotion, we can say we feel waves of emotions, or when we are emotional, we cry. So there are a lot of words that they connect water and deep emotions, which just makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Or like, I crave a love as deep as the ocean. Or
Yeah.
like my feelings, come and go in tides, stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's very interesting how even the words are related to watery themes.
Yes. The sign following Cancer is Leo, and Leo probably is different because it feels safer to step out, looking for meaning and purpose, being more proactive than Cancer, because Leo wants to be proactive to reach their final ultimate goal.
Yes, yes. The
And
sun is so much about our life path and our purpose. And in a way it's like,
needs confidence
if
to do that.
exactly, if you go through like the evolution of the signs before, now it's like, okay, we got the body, we got the we got like the birth, we got the intellect, now we got the emotions, and now what we have the package. Now we can start to create the meaning and start living out the purpose, which is
Yeah.
so much, Leo and the sun especially.
Yes, indeed. Whereas if we turn back to talk about the Cancer Capricorn axis,
Mhm, which is the
it is,
opposition.
yeah, it is so classic. We can say rationality versus emotion, being realistic versus being dreamy. But what is very interesting about this dichotomy is that, you know, Cancer and Capricorn look so different from the outside, but they are actually looking for the same thing. Both
Mhm.
Capricorn and Cancer are trying to provide nourishment and safety. They just seek it in, different ways and modalities. Not modalities in the sense they're both cardinal, but in different approaches. Capricorn tends to provide more for people with objective actions, whereas Cancer tries to provide with people with emotional connection, listening, nourishment. But essentially, they are both trying to establish a strong nucleus, something really strong. Um, And I think that is something which is so beautiful about the solstice axis, because they are both point in which big change happen, and they just want to get ready. Cancer is still summer, but the light will decrease. Cancer wants the safety, whereas Capricorn is like, okay, the light, it will come, but we still have winter. We still have to be strong and keep going. So I want to assure you that we will get there. So it's very beautiful. Also, Capricorn, is the temple of the malefic, it's the domicile of Saturn and the exaltation of Mars. So, but it is also the fall of Jupiter. So I think one of the strongest opposition between Cancer and Capricorn is that just Capricorn cannot stand the dogmatic feelings of Cancer. Capricorn is like, you want to feel this way, that is okay. But the objective facts can, be discussed. We can discuss about it because maybe you have a perspective that is not necessarily objective and we can talk about it. But as we were saying, sometimes Cancer is really attached to their feelings and doesn't want to see that. And, that is when the discussion can be not pleasant for Cancer, especially. Capricorn can just more be annoyed by that. But for Cancer, it can be hard. Sorry, we had to take a break. So for this reason, you might hear some changes in the topic. We hope not. We were talking about, Capricorn and Cancer. And after all, we can say that they are both really committed with, what they want to, but in really different way. And this is what can cause, the difference, and the difficulty of those signs.
Yes, and we were also mentioning like the differences between, Cancer having a strong, moon rulership and exaltation in Jupiter, and being, in its detriment and fall and the malefic signs, while Capricorn is like the malefic sign. In a sense that like Mars is exalted in Capricorn and Saturn is the ruler, and Capricorn has its fall and detriment in Jupiter and the moon. So it's quite opposite in that way, where both are focused on, nurturance and keeping up a sort of safety. It's just expressed in very, very different ways, where again, I'm not sure if we mentioned that before. I think you made a lot of good points, but just to like summarize it more towards the end, there's also like this carrying of certain burdens. And I think for Cancer, it's a lot, for both, it's like internal. They're both yin signs at the end of the day. Still for Cancer, it's much more like, home based and like in the four walls, whereas the Capricornian burdens are much more like worldly stuff.
Yeah.
Where it feels like Capricorn is carrying, like the world on their shoulders type of thing. And Cancer is more like holding up the burden of like the family and making sure that everything is like sorted out and everyone feels good.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just surprising also the emotional depth of Cancer and their, like, the imagination of Cancer. And it might seem irrelevant from the outside, but sometimes also considering people are carrying a lot of emotions that can go very deeply. And when I think that when a Cancerian opens up, one can also be a little bit surprised of the depth of the emotion they are carrying with them, sorry. Because of course, they tend to share their emotion until a certain extent, but not always. Of course, it depends on many, many factors. But this is definitely a thing and a good point.
Yes, I'm thinking of how there's like they're very aware of the depth they're carrying. And in a way, it's also like this factor of like, oh, well, whom can I open up to fully and get that
Mm,
safety? And where should I better not do that? And if I'm also thinking about the cardinal quality of Cancer, which would be in essence like where does water start from? So like a spring or like the starting point. And
yes.
usually if you would be somewhere out there and you would have to dig very deep to find a water source. So in a way, there is like there's also a lot to dig to, get there.
Hmm. Hmm.
I feel like also because we're also going to talk about the other water signs too. I feel like that's what cancers or cancerians and Scorpio people have in common. I think both of them can appreciate each other's depth. I feel like both of them can
For
go
sure.
very, very deep, while as Pisces might not be as deep from the water sign perspective, or deep in a different way. It's not as
Yes, I would
it's
say
not as
yes.
dark. It's not as dark as Cancer and Scorpio.
But it can be rather delusional, though.
Yeah, that's the common theme between, also Cancer being the exaltation in Jupiter and Pisces being ruled by Jupiter.
Yeah.
That's what Pisces and Cancer then have in common.
Yes, indeed. Um, we can just compare the water sign right now. I would say that, yeah, as you mentioned, Pisces is more adaptable, of course, and just follows the flow, of events. And, it is this Jupiterian confidence of Pisces that allows to Pisces to just go with the flow, whereas, Cancerian don't like that because they want to be sure to have safety, you know. However, if Cancerian wants something, it's much more committed and determined, and they can get there more easily, whereas the Pisces might just follow the flow and then eventually get lost or just change their route, which is actually something that can be very useful in certain situations. But it depends. It depends on what you need in that moment. I think that they can go very well together. I mean, all of the water sign, they are connected with a trine, but like both of them can understand each other emotion, and both of them are supportive signs for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the water rules over the emotion, so it's like it's the emotional trine.
Yeah, but then we have
There's
Scorpio, it is emotional, it is deep, yes, but
protective, just as Cancer, even more.
even more like like Cancer is just like protective, and no, Scorpio is
Scorpio
like, I
is
will kill you.
yeah, I feel like the Scorpio is guarded, not just protective. Cancer
Yeah,
is like protective and Scorpio is like
hyper guarded.
totally. It's like a watchdog, and it's not essentially something wrong with that. It's just having a very, very good radar, of
Exactly.
navigating safety and non-safety and what it means to have an experience, especially an emotional experience. And Scorpio is very, very aware that they are, a deep sign, and that they go to places that not every other sign is comfortable going to, and that it requires this navigation and this testing out of like, can I go there with this other person or not? Is it worth it? So that's why
Mhm.
the guard is essentially a very important
Mhm.
safety mechanism. And
Yeah.
also I mean, to all signs, but I just really like to compare when I think about the elements and think of them in a very literal way. So we already talked about a cardinal water. How would that look like? It would be like a well or a spring, somewhere where water starts, like or a river or something like that. And then Pisces which is mutable water, that's like the ocean, right? Like a vast, sea, and everything is there and there's so much happening. And then like fixed water, that would be either literal ice, like in the form, or just like a pond or something that is not
Yeah.
really movable, that is
Yeah.
just in a place. And if you think about it in that way, the other two places, it's like it's much easier to come around, like, because the pond is so fixed, it's very detrimental what comes into the pond. Like if you put poison into the pond or something, that is like the whole pond can die out. It's very important. But then like a river can just flush it away, and especially in the oceans it might not even be felt because of the vastness of it. So this, I think, also gives a bit more context as to why Scorpio also needs to be more protective and guarded,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, yeah, it's very important to distinguish what can come into this, circle of
Yeah.
Scorpio.
I have the luck to know a very beautiful couple. He has a stellium in Scorpio, she has a stellium in Cancer. And what is the most beautiful thing, I think that the Scorpio person is the one who is always surprised of the optimism of the Cancerian one. And it's very beautiful though, because the and this can be very healing for Scorpio, like the Cancer can really help the Scorpio to remember that not everyone is trying to stab you in the back. Whereas the Scorpio can really help the Cancer to protect more from people, to not overgive, to set boundaries. Because sometimes, I think we mentioned it, Cancer can be a little bit overgiving in nature. And so they really go well together. Although maybe,
Yeah.
yes, sometimes they can struggle between optimism and pessimism. It can be a lesson for both of them to balance optimism and pessimism, but for sure it can also create some contrast sometimes. But it's still a trine, so overall it's very harmonious as a pair.
Yes, and I'm also again thinking about the rulerships, how, since the moon is essentially in its fallen Scorpio, so it's not a good moon. And this is exactly where, Cancer can help Scorpio out. Um, and and again, Scorpio is Mars ruled at the end of the day. Mars is in its detriment, in its fall, sorry, in Cancer. So
Mhm.
this is where, Scorpio can help out Cancer.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very beautiful, beautiful logic behind it.
Yeah,
I
I've never thought about it this way, but now it just
Now you
makes like
have it.
sense.
Now you have it. I think it can be hard to compare Cancer with Aries at first. They are both cardinal fire, but one of the biggest difference maybe is that Aries is way more impulsive, and Aries doesn't care about emotional reaction of other people if it feels the impulse to act. Whereas the Cancer can be offended by this attitude, and maybe Cancer prefers to reflect and imagine and wait a little bit more time before to act, because still Cancer is a yin sign, but they do some sort of action. um, so there is this difference, and they could get into unnecessary fights because maybe the Cancer can feel hurt or triggered, and maybe Aries is not polite, and this can lead to a discussion. But I would say that both of them, even though in a really different way, uh, can really fight for their tribe. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Totally,
They
yeah.
really can. I think that this is, one of the best things they have in common. And at their best, Aries could take, Cancer out of its shell and say, hey, enjoy life, let's go on adventures without, hesitating too much. In the other side, Cancer could teach Aries to be more kind and gentle with words and action, and trying to be more of an empath towards other people.
Yeah, for sure. There's yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because again, also the rulership scheme, how not only is Aries, of course, ruled by Mars, but also has its exaltation in the sun. And there's definitely something of like bringing some sort of purpose quality out of Cancer, and in the best case scenario, really taking Cancer out of the home, because the Cancer can be a homebody, and it can just dwell in the comfort zone at times. And
Yeah,
Aries can
sure.
really get Cancer to get out of the comfort zone and start, as you said, like to live a bit more and get out there and see that, there's also so much beauty on the other side of, discomfort. And the same applies on the others, on the other, vice versa, where, Aries might be like the sign that is constantly fighting whatever battle it needs something to do, and Cancer can teach Aries to sit in the discomfort of feeling comfortable just at home and doing nothing in that sense, at least not in the way that Aries would usually go on about things. So I think this is what both of them can teach each other, while still, again, it's a weird couple if you think about it in
It is.
like the first way.
Yeah, yes, indeed. But I do remember, anyhow, last year, so summer 2022, I was very, impressioned by Jupiter that was in Aries, that was squaring, the Cancer planet during the summer, because, I kind of felt an energy of like fighting for family, fighting for the people you care about. I Of course, that was my personal experience. It really depends on the chart, but just as we were talking about it, it just reminded me of that energy, because it's not necessarily easy, the comparison between cardinal signs, because hey, they form a square between each other, and square are hard aspect. They are said to be of the nature of Mars, and the comparison with Libra can be a little bit more tricky, because they seems to go better together, since Libra really cares about being polite, being fair, being correct, being very diplomatic. And, Libra really values other people's emotions and opinion. But, the difficulty sometimes for Libra can be understanding the irrationality of the emotional nature of Cancer. Not that all of the emotions are irrational, but sometimes some feelings just are irrational by nature. And Libra, being such an intellectual sign, can struggle with it. And also, Cancer is way more inward, whereas Libra is more social oriented. And also about the struggle that Libra could have in understanding really in-depth Cancer emotions. It can also be because Libra is the exaltation of Saturn. So, it's more realistic. It tends to value objectivity and rationality to evaluate if something is fair or not. So this can be a little bit of tension between Libra and Cancer. But I like that they are for sure both able to respect and value each other. I'm sure of that.
Yes, definitely. I'm also imagining if both of them threw a party together and how it would probably fit very well, because both of them could cater to the people that come in a different way. um where, Cancer might organize the cozy atmosphere and might be really concerned how everyone is going to feel in this room. And it's going to be, oh, we should do this so everyone feels like emotionally well. And then we should sing the songs and I don't know, go through old pictures or something.
Yeah.
And then Libra is going to be very much concerned with like, okay, let's have this type of food so that everyone, with all the allergies, gets this, and we need to have a list, and we need to know at which time we're going to do the karaoke so that, and I know that,
Everything can
this person has to
participate.
leave then. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be
Yeah.
much more on a different level, but I feel like both of them could organize a
That's
party
very
together very
good
well, and this is
point.
how they can get along, but of course still misunderstand each other. Where I mean,
Yeah.
the it's just the feeling of Cancer being not feeling understood if Libra is being too objective and too much in the mind, and then obviously Libra being like, oh gosh, you're
Triggered.
stop being so emotional.
Yes. Yeah,
So
feeling triggered is not nice.
it's not
Of
nice, no.
course. Yeah, I think that was a good comparison. We just missed the comparison with Taurus and with Virgo, which are the signs that Cancer forms a sextile with. Um, I like before while you were talking about the comfort zone of Cancer, and I think that this is something it's very good with Taurus energy. They
For
like
sure.
both staying home, comfort zones, or just, enjoy their comfort. I mean, I grew up with a Cancer stellium mom and a Taurus stellium dad, and oh gosh, sometimes it was very hard to propose something new to do because they were really, really into their comfort zone and their habits and their routines. So that was a funny part, but they can be really nurturing. It's a sextile aspect. It's a
Yeah.
very good one.
And of
But
course, Taurus having its exaltation in the moon in Cancer's ruling sign.
what? No, the moon has the exaltation in Taurus.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, sorry. Yeah, the moon has its exaltation in Taurus, which is the ruling sign of Cancer. So obviously there's like a very good common ground for security
Yeah.
and nourishment together.
Yeah, of course. And with Virgo, I feel, the Virgo is ruled by Mercury. There is this, good similarity on the fact that both really care about communication. But also Virgo is not like Gemini. Virgo is efficient communication. So Virgo might also find interesting, the perspective of Cancerian people to simply have an efficient communication to deliver some messages. And to be honest, I think that since Virgo is so process oriented, they can be a very good team, especially in workplaces. Because,
Yeah.
like Virgo has the ability of considering many factors and putting them together for a practical reason. But then, Cancer maybe can have the imagination that sometimes Virgo can need, or, the ability of care and consider emotion of people. And that can be useful for many projects, especially if they are directed towards the public. So that's very nice.
Yes, there's definitely a good combination. I was just thinking of multiple people that I know that either had relationships together or are just good friends with, like Cancer rising and Virgo moon or
Mm-hmm.
something else. And I find these people being very good friends, like very caring for each other in different ways. And really being able to help each other out. I feel like it's a very
Yeah.
good long-term friendship placement thing. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel that too. I feel this way too. It feels like very, I would say, efficient friendship, very
Definitely.
functional relationships.
Good functional, yeah. Not like with some other signs, but
No, no, exactly. Yeah, that was all for the comparison. I think we can just briefly mention the parts of the body that are ruled by Cancer.
Yes, so in medical astrology, the body parts that are ruled by the Cancer are, for one, the breasts, which I think makes a lot of sense with, you know, the mother quality.
No explanations
And
needed.
exactly, and the stomach, and also the mucus
Mucosal membranes.
mucosal membranes, and also the rib cage, actually, which
Yeah,
is very interesting.
it's
So
our shell.
yeah, exactly. So, because like the lungs itself are ruled by Gemini, and then the rib cage, there's like this protective quality to the lungs, which is the next sign. So I
Indeed.
really, really like that. And especially again, because of the association with like the shell and the protection. Um, really love that. And
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
the
Okay.
stomach,
Oh, yes, that's true.
the stomach as well, since a lot of the times people talk about gut feelings, and
Hmm.
so many times people feel their feelings in, like, you know, the belly and here, like obviously also in the heart, but so much is also really in the stomach. And how it makes so much sense, and how also people say that, you know, the gut is the second brain. So
Yeah, but those are more the intestines, though. Whereas the stomach is more like it's still more like the digestion, especially for
yeah,
proteins and all of that. And I don't know, it just feels like you know it's the necessary step to absorb nourishment.
mhm.
So of course, without a stomach, the nutrients couldn't be absorbed in the intestines. And it's also funny because we were talking about the lifestyle between Virgo and Cancer, and Virgo
Yeah,
rules the intestines. So you see
yes,
how is efficient this
absolutely.
relationship. But yeah,
Yeah.
Cancer is like, okay, let's break things down so that we can have the energy, we can be nourished. It's a providing. It's a way of providing for energy in one of the steps of the, of course, nutrient absorption.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absorption. Okay. Yeah. Did we forget something very nice we wanted to say?
I think we said everything we need to say now. And again, as we progress further along with the episodes, we're obviously always going to come back to the previous signs in some sort of way as well. So
Mm-hmm.
we're still going to talk about Cancer in comparisons and everything. And yeah, and the next episode will be about Leo. And
Yeah.
this will be the
Mhm.
continuation.
Of course. Just we apologize because probably this episode will be published in the very last days of Cancer seasons. We had things that came up, but we are just very happy that we recorded it during the new moon in Cancer, because I don't know about you, Amia, but I felt like the vibes were very good for this episode.
Yeah, it felt very much in the flow, just like water.
Exactly.
And again, I love that it's also Monday, the moon day. So
Mhm.
it's just very, very fitting. And again, it's super at the end of the season. It's like when we publish this, probably just the sun will be in Cancer. Like the
Yes,
last planet, we had so many planets in Cancer like a few months ago.
but that's okay. It will be, it will serve the purpose of
Absolutely.
reflection and introspection. Cancer will love
Absolutely.
that.
Especially because we filmed it on this like electional day in a way. So
Yes.
I hope you
Okay.
get the Cancer vibes
Yeah.
from the episode.
We hope it too. Okay. Thank you, everybody. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.